So business guys have this term, this analogy that they like to use of the bird and the frog. And it might sound like a children's myth or a fable, but really it's just a metaphor for what's your perspective or vantage point on a particular industry or domain or trend or topic. And the bird is quite simply staying up high and looking down on everything, taking it all in. And then the frog is the one who's down in the muck, looking at the weeds, like literally lost in the weeds, which is another term that business folks like to use when you're just so wrapped up in all the nitty gritty and details that you can't see the bigger picture. So bird is big picture, frog is zoomed in. Now, the entire point of this is kind of me reflecting on where we're at and where we're going and what all the different kind of camps are saying. So when I started my channel, I was very much a frog. And what I mean by that is I was doing tutorials, I was doing prompting, I was doing fine tuning and coding and that sort of thing. I was very much lost in the weeds of, how do we use GPT-3 and then GPT-4 to do these things. But then over time, I zoomed out. And actually, most of my audience came to me when I switched to the bird phase, because I was looking at the impact that AI is having. What does it mean for society? What does the future look like, and what lessons can we glean from the past? So I'd taken that bird perspective. But interestingly, and many people in the audience have noticed this, is they're like, Dave, you're less optimistic or you're less head in the clouds lately. Some people like it, some people don't. People evolve. And I'm actually going to talk about how not just I'm evolving, but how what I see evolving out in society. That's the whole point of the video. So I've kind of become more of a frog again, where I'm focusing on post-labor economics more and more, which is a very specific kind of impact and a specific kind of intervention. I still pay attention to AI specifically. I tweet about it all the time. I post about it on LinkedIn. I write about it on Substack. And of course, I still make commentary videos when a big new tool drops or GPT-5 drops, that sort of thing. And, okay, so that's the pivot that I'm going through. And when I think that other people are going through similar pivots or similar kind of maturations or maybe normalizations. So when you think about the different camps, right? There's a few primary big camps. There's the doomerist camp, the AI X risk factor, where that's led by people like Yudkowsky and Connor Leahy. So you've got that group, and they're kind of simmering down. At least it seems like it. A lot of people in AI safety have actually distanced themselves from the more extreme X risk people. And then another camp I would say is probably the skeptics, which these are people who are actively engaged, but are kind of dubious about the impact or always a little bit more pessimistic or glasses half empty, led by people like Gary Marcus. And then there's the optimism or, kind of utopian futurist bros. And when I take a look across the landscape, I've definitely been in that camp because I'm very, very optimistic about the future and what this technology means. And I've certainly been more on the farther end of that. Although I will say there is a camp that is even beyond where I've ever been, which is like the schizo hype kind of people, where it's just like, this is going to change everything. And some people say that I am on that end of the spectrum. And to be fair, from an outside perspective, yeah, it certainly looks like that. But what I will say is that the incentives of YouTube in particular really favor hype. Like the more extreme you go, the more attention you get. And for most of my YouTube career, I've been caught between what does the algorithm actually reward versus what do I feel is true. And lately I'm just focusing what I feel is actually true. When I look at some of my old videos, I'm like, I probably shouldn't have said that. But that kind of maturation, I think, is a signal that many of us are going through, because a lot of people are kind of done with the hype. They're done with the negativity. Both extremes feel like they're cooling off to me. And it's because it's becoming normalized. And, many of you in the audience have noticed it. I'm less head in the clouds, but a lot of other people are also less head in the clouds. When you see people distancing themselves from the more extreme tales of both sides of, optimism, pessimism, versus, full hype or doomerism. And then, of course, there's people that still stick their heads in the sand, mostly on LinkedIn. It's really interesting how far behind the curve people on LinkedIn are, because you'd think it's like a business oriented social media network, they'd be like, AI is the coolest thing for business. And what's really interesting is some of the most negative people about AI have like founder AI company in their title. I think that, in some cases, obviously, selection bias, sample size, and everyone on social media is optimizing for engagement at a certain level. Because if you don't see it, they didn't optimize for engagement. So, there's a structural reason for a lot of this. At the same time, when we have conversations behind the scenes, frank conversations with business leaders, thought leaders, politicians, professors, that sort of stuff, they're also feeling some of the same things. And so one of the biggest examples that I have is whenever I give a talk at a university, one of the concerns that comes up is that most kids these days want to become a YouTuber. That's the dream job, or some kind of content creator. They want to become an influencer or content creator, and they're worried about AI is going to invalidate their education. And they ask, Dave, what would you do? And I'm like, look, all the coding and stuff that I learned in school, I've never used it professionally. I learned Pascal and C++ in school. By the time I got to industry, it was PowerShell and Python. And then after that, it was prompt engineering. It was prompt engineering. So writing in English. And I was like, so whatever you learn in school, you're not gonna use. And of course, no grad student who's paying, $60,000 or however much it is to go to Duke wants to hear that. But that's the truth of it. So it's like, I've decided that, it's just the easiest thing to do is just to be real and not kind of beat around the bush or, go full tilt doomerism or that sort of thing. Because I still write some stuff on Substack that is like, it's worse than you think it's going to be. And the reason is because that's just what sells. Like, and when I say like that's what sells, that's what gets the views. And thanks to my fellow YouTubers, I think it was Matt Wolf said this to me, and he said it to a group, but the audience doesn't want to hear your opinions. They want to hear their opinions come out of your mouth. And so what every content creator is incentivized to do is, to a certain extent, share their perspective, but to frame it in a way that the audience resonates with immediately and fully, because that's what keeps eyes on screen, and that's what keeps subscribers coming and that sort of thing. And it feels really gross. Like when you first get into it, like if you're idealistic, one of the things that people say is like, stick to your values, stick to your mission and your purpose, which is true, because then you'll just attract people to your purpose and your mission. And I think every camp has kind of solidified around that, and that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about all the different like AI religions. There's the doomers, the skeptics, there's the schizo hype optimists, and that kind of thing. Everyone's kind of set in their ways now, but at the same time, there's a settling and a normalization. Like, okay, what's going on now? So, where I'll end the video is just talking about where I think this is actually going from a social perspective. This is more of an anthropological or sociological perspective. Not that I am an anthropologist or sociologist, but just as a human in a civilization, this is kind of where I see it going. One, I'm still super optimistic about where this is going. Many of us who are watching very closely are noticing that we're still hitting milestones faster than you might think. Some of the milestones are not as glamorous or not as sexy as you might hope. But for instance, one of the things two things in robotics that have happened just in the last month that tell me like, okay, things are progressing apace is, number one, China released a $5,000 humanoid robot, which happened way sooner than anyone thought that it would. So they're proving that industrial scale is there, and at a price point of $5,000, it's going to get cheaper than that, and it's also going to get better. The other thing that has happened is that manual dexterity is advancing by leaps and bounds. And if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you'll notice that one of the things that I've pointed out is we really need to solve manual dexterity before robots really take over, blue-collar work or unskilled labor, because we take for granted how fine our motor control is. But I just saw a video of a Japanese robot threading. So if you ever use one of those mechanical pencils, one of the old school kind where you have to thread the lead end through the tip, they were doing that. So they've gotten robot hands down to sub-millimeter precision. which that's basically humans. That's better than human surgeons because it was a precision level of 0.1 millimeters, which that happened way sooner, way sooner than I thought that it would happen. And it caught a lot of us off guard. So I'm still super optimistic, but at the same time, Hofstadter's law applies, which says it'll take longer than you think that it'll take, even taking into account Hofstadter's law. So we got to buckle in for the long haul. That's point number 2 is, like, yes, things are progressing. Yes, there's exponentials and there's super exponentials, but we're still taking our baby steps, and we have to get to like Olympic level sprinter. So we've entered toddlerhood of AI and robotics, which it's very neat, and the money is there, the investment is there, the research is there, and the attention, the energy is there as well. The excitement is good, but we've still got so much work to do. We got to be in it for the long haul. And what I will say is yes, things are going in a good direction from a technology perspective, but they're not necessarily going in the right direction from a social, political, economic perspective yet. Now, in some cases, I will agree. For a lot of people, they point out like it's too early to tell. And it really is too early to tell in some respects. And what I mean by that is, yes, we've seen the first waves of AI-based layoffs, the first waves of robots and agents kind of infringing upon human labor. There is some indication that we're experiencing a net job loss, and the creative destruction. The creative part is not happening yet. I personally don't think it's going to happen because all the reasons expressed in my work on post-labor economics, and because of that, the outcome is not guaranteed. Particularly when you see politicians and business leaders who still don't get it. And one of the alarming points that I'll point out is that what many politicians and business leaders say publicly is not what they say privately. And there's more and more leaks coming out, and I always repost the stuff when I see that, when it's like, hey, they said the quiet part out loud, pay attention to what they do, not what they say. But at the same time, there is a disconnect between the official narrative and the actual narrative. But there's also, I think, a disconnect because many people in power are honestly skeptical. They say, oh, whatever, it'll create new jobs because it always does, and they have these axiomatic beliefs. And I'm concerned that some of those deeply held axiomatic beliefs about the way the world works and the way that technology works and the way that things progress will delay some of the inevitable things. Now, at the same time, I'm also one who very much believes in incrementalism, not necessarily just Pareto improvements, but incrementalism as a general principle, making incremental changes to businesses, to government, to laws, to regulations, because whenever you study complex adaptive systems, which government is a form of complex adaptive system, you turn this knob over here and something over there breaks. I mean, anyone who codes knows that too. So you tweak a variable over here or a function over there and something across the entire domain falls apart, and you don't understand why until you unpack, okay, what are the feedback loops, what are the spillover effects, and that sort of thing. So the outcome is not guaranteed, and there's a lot of frictions in the system. That's that skepticism that I'm talking about. And skepticism has a purpose in society. As much as I disagree with people like Gary Marcus, he's serving an important sociological function, which is why he has the following that he has, is because for some people, they're just reflexively skeptical, and in a population, you're going to have a natural distribution of personality traits, and that natural distribution of personality traits means that collectively humanity is the superintelligence. We're already a superintelligence because we look at things collectively from every possible angle. So I don't have to agree with him. You don't have to agree with him. You don't have to agree with me. But we all have a piece of the puzzle and our own perspective. And by communicating it the way that we do, watching videos and reading blogs and that sort of stuff, we'll triangulate what the truth actually is over time. And it's not, and when I say we, I don't mean like one day I will know the exact truth. What I mean is that humanity will arrive at a good enough consensus to move forward. So with that being said, thanks for watching to the end. I hope you liked this format. If you like the more sober format, and of course there are channels out there that are more sober, let me know. I would prefer to be this way from now on. instead of trying to engage in like hype or disappointment or that sort of stuff. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and see you next time. Cheers.